And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Clancy.
My name is Vaughn. No, wait, that's his notes. My name is Clancy Immisland, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be here tonight, glad to be back at the reunion again tonight. I had my heart broken last night. In my honor, they lit the candle, and tonight, I guess in my honor, they blew it out. I want to go over the schedule with you, Philip, a little bit better next week. But I'm glad to be safe and sane and sober because I didn't used to be. I enjoyed Gail and Vaughn's talks tonight. I'm glad to see some old friends here, many old friends, and folks from hither and yon. Recently, I was doing some reading, and I ran across something that seemed a little interesting to me. The story of smallpox. Now, you wouldn't think you'd hear that at an AA meeting, would you? But in the 1700s, smallpox was about the most lethal contagion going, which would just sweep into a city, New York or London or Bristol or Philadelphia, and just wipe out a third of the people. Nobody knew what the hell was happening. They had no knowledge of bacteria or germs or anything. Just looks as though God was just punishing people. And I have a book home called Bring Out Your Dead. It talks about Philadelphia in the early 1700s. What they'd do, they'd run the carts through the streets and say, bring out your dead, and you'd take your mother or your baby who just died and throw them on the wagon. Nothing else could be done about it. And there was no answer. Nobody could figure it out at all. There was a doctor in London named Dr. Edward Jenner. And he was a young guy, and he wanted to help these people. Doctors didn't really want to even help them because you get close to them, you get sick yourself and die. And but he would try to work with these people somehow as best he could. And he ran across a funny phenomenon. There was a little group of girls who never got smallpox. They were surrounded by people who got smallpox, but they didn't. And he couldn't, why would that be? And he talked to them, and one was from Wales, and one was from Scotland, and they're all from all over, had nothing in background. They all had different names, they all had different families. And he also noticed there's some girls just like them who got smallpox, but these small amount of girls didn't. And he couldn't imagine what it was. And then he finally stumbled on what all these girls did for a living was milk cows. And this particular group of girls had all had a little small disease called cowpox, which happened to girls that milk cows. And the girls who got smallpox, the cow milkers, are the girls who did not ever get cowpox. But the girls who got cowpox never got smallpox. And he couldn't, how could that be? How could getting one disease keep you from getting another disease? That's ridiculous. But he bought a little boy named Jimmy Phipps for $10 or so, or 2 pounds at that time, I believe. And he took them where they had some people had cowpox, and he didn't know how to transfer illnesses or disease, or just cut a little kid in the kid's arm, cut a little slit, and took some blood and pus off of someone with cowpox and rubbed it in there. And the kid got cowpox and got better again. Then he took him to where they were dying of smallpox. And just dreadful. And here he cut his other arm, didn't want to use a stick this time to get some pus and blood off him, rubbed it in his arm. And the kid got sick and got better. And he thought, somehow, in some way, getting cowpox keeps you from getting smallpox. But nobody could ever, how in the world could that be? And he announced it, that there was now an answer to smallpox. And most people wouldn't, that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. In fact, there's an interesting thing. You know, the Latin word for cow is vacus. vaccination means injection of the cow so that you won't get smallpox. And they, little by little, they noticed that the people who got the cowpox vaccination didn't get smallpox, so it got accepted a little bit more and a little bit more. But still, a lot of people died. They would not accept such a concept. But 100 years later, they discovered why this happened. Because when they had microscopes, they could see that the matter in cowpox had the power to stop the spread of smallpox. They didn't know why exactly, but it did. At least they understood why. And as I read that, I thought to myself, that's kind of the way Alcoholics Anonymous is today. We have something that works and saves lives, and nobody can tell you why it works. Why does it work? Huh? Or if you're Norwegian like me, you just say, huh? And so it's an interesting thing. We have something that, where we have to try to communicate to people to try taking this cowpox we got here. But why should I take it? Well, because I said so, that's why. Not much of a reason. But little by little, it's accepted. But there's still a lot of people who will not accept this, and they die from it, people like us. Because, alcoholics of our type have been around a long time. There are at least 4,000 years of written records of people like us who react differently to alcohol. And it is estimated that something maybe 1 in 12 drinkers become alcoholics. And now there's an answer for it. And so it's just maddening that people will not accept it. And in my work, I see people dying from alcoholism on a continuing basis, and they won't accept it. I just want to shake them and say, come on! But then I have to stop and remember, why did I slip in AA year after year after year after year for 10 years? The worst 10 years of my life came after I came to AA. The worst drinking in my life, the worst all these things. And I'd go to AA, and AA had no answer for me. And I hate pain. Why in the world would I reject it? And I have to think about that because it's something we all have to overcome in a sense, I think, in one way or another. I went to my first meeting in at the end of the 1940s, a long time ago. A lot of you young folks weren't even born. And I don't know if I said this last night or not, but I want to say, because there's so many of you young people here. In my home group in Los Angeles, we have a lot of young people. And if you're like the young people in our group, I want to tell you something. You are the future leaders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're like the young people in our group, I'll tell you something else. I'm really glad I'm going to be dead. I'm not judging them, just the facts of life, But I came to AA. I was still at the university after I got out of the war, out of the Navy after the Second World War, and I went to the university. And then my drinking got kind of bad, and I got bizarre, and I really loved it, though, because alcohol, I always thought alcohol was the best thing there was going for that I ever found. And somebody said, why don't you go to this Alcoholics Anonymous thing downtown? There's some old town drunks are going to it, even they're slowing down and they're drinking. I said, okay. So I went to this Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, 8 fat old guys sitting around a table. One guy said, what the hell are you doing here? I thought, that's kind of a funny welcome. But I realized now why it was, because I was 22, and I looked even younger than that, and there wasn't anybody in AA under 40 years old in that whole state. So just like some little kid coming on tonight, 8 years old, say, I think I'm an alcoholic. Oh, do you? I think you have a broken nose. But I sat around, I listened to these old fools, and I don't, all their, I drank, I just stayed drunk all the time, it was just terrible. I read around since I've been sober. And, just, what kind of, I'm not like that. And I heard somewhere along the line, I don't know if I heard it there or sometime later when I was going to AA. I was thinking my classic, what AA is to me. Some old guy said, I stayed drunk around the clock, night and day for 25 years. One day I walked through that door, and they told me to put the plug in the jug, and I did. And I've just never been so damn happy. Hasta la vista, baby. But I went to that, I got out of college and I'd had a lot of drinking. I had, my drinking was quite notorious, I'm afraid. At the end of my college career, I'd been hired to teach journalism at a place called Duluth, Minnesota. And they canceled me out before I even started on the grounds of moral turpitude, so I knew that was coming to a disadvantage. But I went out in the world, I became a sports writer. I worked on newspapers writing about sports because I'd won some trophies for the university. And in college, I'd met this, I was raised in a very strong Norwegian Lutheran ethic, which is, they're quite, if you're not a Lutheran, you're not really with it, you know. And I met this girl in college with black hair and black flashing eyes, and God, she just seemed so mysterious to me, not like all those blondes in the Norwegian church. And she won my heart. And then she dropped the big one on me. She said, I'm a Catholic. God, I can't bring her home. What could I do with her, you know? But she had me in her clutches. So we got married, and my grandmother cried every time she saw us for about 2 years. But I became a sports writer, and it's the job I've liked best of any job I've ever had, because I just like sports, and I like writing about it, and I have a flair for writing. And my wife began manifesting the behavior of Catholics that I did not know or understand. I'd never heard of it. Lutherans never hear about what Catholics are doing. And if there's any little Protestant boy here who's thinking about marrying a good Catholic girl, I have some news for you. You are going to have a bigger family than you thought you would have. I started my next career as a national distributor of small Catholics. I said to my wife, can't we use birth control? No. It's hard to remember how different things were then. I don't know what I'd have done if she'd have said yes. Because I'd been through a war, I'd been overseas, I'd been through a major university, and I heard the word condom once in my life, maybe, in a Navy training film. It showed this voluptuous woman coming out of her costume, just lovely, and said, if you go to bed with her and don't use a condom, you'll get some terrible disease. At that stage of my life, I wouldn't care what I would get if I could just be with her. It's kind of a funny thing about, at that time, the closest thing you heard to birth control, you'd find kind of wayward young guys saying things like, I got a rubber. And even they would be ashamed to buy it. They'd have to hire someone depraved to go in and buy it. And they'd go and say things like, hey, give me some cigarettes. And some rubbers. Now look how much progress we've made the last 60 years. The drugstore by my house, kids come in there. I guess they're grown up, but they look like kids to me. Say, hey, give me a package of condoms. And some cigarettes. Well, but so I had to get better jobs, and my family rose. I had a flair for writing. I got a job in advertising in a big corporation, and I did very well there. But I drank a lot, because to me, alcohol sustains me. My problem never really was alcohol. I felt my problem is that I have a lot of emotions and feelings, and people screw me around, and alcohol smooths them out. And I just knew somehow I'd overcome that problem. I was drinking too much. In fact, I think about that sometimes. You know, that first time I got sober, some old guy had me read the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I read it. And they say it's a badly written book. It isn't a badly written book. I discovered it right away. It's a terribly dull book. Just dull, dull. I like things that are exciting. And if you are a Storo at this stage of your development, you just... And some years later, when I got sober again, for the last time, my new sponsor had me read the big book, and I said, I read that book. He said, well, read it again. And I read it again, and I felt sorry. I had misremembered it. I had forgotten how dull it really was. It was terrible. I just gave up on it. I read it again, and just gave up. Nothing in it applied to me anyway. And it's a funny thing, some years later when I read what I got was, you know, it's the funny thing about that book, it gets smarter every year. Every time another year sober, you read that, my God, it's smarter. That wasn't in there last year. But I found in chapter 3, much to my surprise, the story of my life. And I had no idea. I read it twice before. I had no connection whatsoever. And if you're in there, it's kind of the first page or two of chapter 3 is the best description of alcoholism of our type that I've ever seen. And it talks about how people like us, we all share at least one obsession, which we have to accept voluntarily or involuntarily. And we all seem to have that obsession that somehow, someday, I will control and enjoy my drinking. It says the persistence of this illusion is amazing. Most people followed into the gates of insanity and death. And I thought I was the only one in the whole world doing that, trying to find a way to do it. And they go on to say that we have occasional brief recoveries, you know, where you think, oh, I've got the answer now. If I eat before I go out, then I'll be all right. Then you discover it just gives you more to vomit, that's all. And you fight the term alcoholic and you try to keep away from it, and then that tasty little phrase comes, you reach a stage of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Remember reading that and thinking, boy, these people really get drunk to get like that. But that isn't what that's about at all. That's how you feel after you get sober. And people want some explanation for your behavior, and you haven't got it. You have pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Why do you do that? And the correct answer is, leave me alone. Leave me alone. Get off my back. Leave me alone. I don't suppose anybody in this room hasn't had the experience somewhere along the line of seeing that face of someone who loves you so disappointed again and so upset and looking and saying, how could you do that? You promised, and you were doing better. And we were starting to feel there was some hope, and now you're drunk again. How could you do that? Well, leave me alone. I don't know the answer. Get off my back. Stop nagging me, for Christ's sake. Leave me alone. And never once knowing that that is the hallmark of this illness. And to the end of that little portion of chapter 3, it talks about what people like us do. Change from one kind of booze to another. Maybe that'll do it. Drink beer only. That doesn't work either. Drink natural wines. That takes it a little quicker, you know. Read spiritual literature. Going on a trip, not taking a trip. Swearing off with or without a solemn oath. Going to treatment centers. Now, when I read that and started to understand it, I realized I had done every one of those things except one. I have never not taken a trip. Because when the heat's on, I move it out. As far as I'm concerned, only cowards stay and face the consequences. But that great thing that I spent my entire adult life doing that, fighting that again and again, because I knew I wasn't an alcoholic. It doesn't take long to discover. Some of you new guys here tonight, young man who blew out my candle, We love you. But it doesn't take long to discover about AA. Alcoholics are people whose problem is alcohol. They drink too much. They come to AA and admit their problem is alcohol. That seems to make them feel better. Then they return to God. And then they show their gratitude by helping others. It's all very nice. But it has nothing to do with me. I remember watching these people, hearing them talk and thinking, God, I wish I were dumb like you are and would believe that crap, but I'm not. And I went to work as a writer and did quite well. But then eventually I got the call that I got many times after that. Call me in the office. Clancy, you're doing a good job and we feel you're a good employee, but we need you on Mondays as well. And when you do come in on Tuesdays, you smell bad. And the first time that happened, I remembered my trip to Alcoholics Anonymous the year before when I was in college. And I had an idea. As I said to this personnel guy, I said, Mr. Collins, you're right. You know, I got drinking heavily overseas. It was terrible over there. But they got this new thing downtown in this town called Alcoholics Anonymous. Give me 2 weeks paid leave and I'll go down there and I'll be cured and I'll come back and do my job. I said, okay, that's fine. Because at that time, Alcoholics Anonymous was just kind of a mysterious thing that people didn't know much about. And I went to AA in that town, and just another same old thing. Different faces, same old crap, how much they drank and how much they were pleased to be sober. They didn't look pleased at all. And I realized I'm not going to get much out of this. But the one thing it did for me, at least I could go home and say to my wife, well, I've gone back to Alcoholics Anonymous. It's going to be all right now. Wonderful. Wonderful, honey. What do they want you to do? Well, they want me to taper off. And there wasn't any Al-Anon then to screw it up for everybody. Ever since the birth of Al-Anon, there's never been a moment's rest for any slipper, anywhere, anytime. Now they don't want you to taper off. You're supposed to stop completely. We have the same steps you do. We have a book. I release you, you son of a bitch. But I did that for years. I different companies. I had good samples that I've written. I could always get a job, and I did that. All of my kids have been born in a different state, was going to be different. And I finally went down in Texas and didn't come back up. I had a big job there, and I didn't come back up, and they called me in and said, you know, you really did it this time, Clancy. You cost us the Fritos account, very big account, multi-million-dollar account, because you forgot to do something you said you were going to do. Give me the keys to your car and get your stuff out of your office, and you're going to be gone tonight. And I'm going to try to make it my business to see that you never work in advertising again. And I had the feeling that's kind of cold. But I took my severance check and drank for a couple of days, had some fun. Then I went home, and apparently they'd called my wife the day before they told me, and she'd sold her furniture and took the kids and moved somewhere else. Just my clothes were on a pile of the floor. And I was at kind of at a loss. And I knew that, because of a series of bad events, I was kind of on probation from the state mental hospital. And I know that my wife undoubtedly had turned me in. That's the way she was. You make one mistake and they turn on you. And so I knew I had to get out of Texas. And about 2 weeks before that, a guy said to me, I got to get my car moved to Los Angeles. Anybody who'll drive it? And I said, no. But that day I did. I said, I'll drive it. He said, I thought you worked at Tracy Locke. I said, I did. I quit. They're a bunch of phonies. So he gave me a credit card and some money, and I went off. And first day, I got as far as El Paso, Texas, and went to Juarez, Mexico, and got drunker than hell. And the next day, I got in my car and drove to as far as Phoenix, Arizona, where I didn't know anybody, so I thought I'd better hide my car well before they snatched that. And I hid my car. And I hid it so well I haven't found it yet. All my clothes, all my ID, all my money, everything. And I was drunk on the street trying to get a guy came down the street. I looked at my car, hey, pal, will you help me find my car? I said, don't bother me. I said, help me find my car. Come on, don't be a boob. He said, don't bother me. And I grabbed him by the lapel. I said, why can't you help me? He took out his badge out of the pocket and said, you shouldn't have done that, kid. And he arrested me. He was a plainclothes cop, and he threw me in the Phoenix jail. I don't know if you're familiar with Phoenix. That's in the middle of the desert. It gets 120 there. And the jail is even hotter up on the third floor. He says, I'm going to cool you off. But you don't cool off in that jail. In the middle of the, I woke up in the middle of the night so sick. And oh, God, I was sick. And I had a vomit down over, vomited. And I thought it was the toilet. Turned out to be somebody's bed. That's what it was, bunk. He wasn't in it, so it wasn't really bad. But I vomited. I kind of filled up his bunk. And then I did something I'm sure most of us know what to do. When you're really sick and you throw up, one of the few pleasures you have is lying down and putting your cheek on the cool tile. Oh, God, that feels good. And go to sleep. And this guy came back from wherever he was and found his bed full of vomit, and this drunken fool lay there. You damn servers! I don't think he meant to do it, but he kicked out my front teeth. And some years before that, I'd spent several $1,000s in psychoanalysis trying to work on my emotions. But that morning was the first morning I was really ever glad I'd been in psychoanalysis. I was almost instantly able to identify his problem. I remember thinking, this son of a bitch is overreacting. But I didn't want to say anything to make trouble. And I got out of jail there in the morning, went up the street and sick and covered with blood and vomit, and no car, no ID, no nothing. And the one thing I'd learned in those years of slipping in and out of AA, and it's something you might want to remember in case you want to be a long-term slipper. When you get to a position where you're so bad that nobody wants you, you smell bad, you look bad, you act bad, there's always one place where you're welcome. I don't know if you have them in England, an AA club. It's the only place in the world where the worse you look, the better they like it. This one's mine, Fred. I found the AA club there a few blocks away, and I hustled some old lady for $20 and for a rehab house, and I took that and ran downtown, bought a bus ticket to Los Angeles, and I got to Los Angeles. And there was a big star there that I had given me a start 2 years before, and I called him up, and he had me come out to Hollywood, and he looked at me and said, oh my God, Clancy, what happened to you? I said, I had a terrible car accident, Ted, and I'm waiting for a check. Could you help me out? He said, oh my God, yes. He peeled out some money, gave me a couple $100, which was a lot in those days. And I rented a little room and cleaned up and had fun, got a couple bottles, drank, and tried to pick up some girls on the street, and just ran out of money. I called him back. I said, Ted, my check hasn't come. Could you help me again? He says, Clancy, I called Dallas and found out you haven't had any car accident. You're a bum. Everybody thinks you're a bum now. You used to be a nice guy, but you're a bum. He said, I don't want to be bothered with you. I said, oh, Jesus, Ted, for old time's sake, please. He said, okay, well, come out to Hollywood, but don't come in the front door this time. Come in the alley in the back tonight at 9 o'clock. If I feel like it, I'll be out there. So I was out there at 8:30 at night, and it raining, and he came out in the fire escape and said, threw a $5 bill that fluttered down to a mud puddle. He says, now stay away from me. I don't want to talk to you again. And I crawled out in the mud puddle and got the $5. That boy, I sure outsmarted him. And a day later, I was tried to sell a pint of blood, and I couldn't sell a pint of blood. I didn't have enough iron in my blood, they told me. And I stood in front, I went to an old mission where they were going to issue, their guy said, go in there and get some breakfast, maybe you'll feel better. So I'd like some breakfast, please. The guy said, God, we just got done serving. You have to come back for lunch. I said, look, I'm very sick. Give me some breakfast, please. He says, we're out of food. Come back at lunch. And I grabbed him by the lapel. Bad habit. And two guys came over. One took each hand and threw me out the door. Said, don't come back, you drunken bum. I tried to explain, I'm not a drunken bum. 3 years ago, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. Ads that I wrote, the Elsie and Alvarez old Borden ads, were running that very week in Life and Collier's, the New Yorker. I've had my picture in the New York Times showed my achievements. But it's really hard to explain these things in midair. And I stood outside that old mission in the cold rain, and I had a feeling, I'm sure some people here have had it, but it's suddenly you realize, you look around, there's no friendly direction. There's no place to go back to, no place to go to. You're just really on your own. If some old guy would come to me that morning and said, you know, Slim, you're dying. You're down to 120 some pounds. You've lost your wife and children. You never see them again. You've lost your career. Once upon a time, they called you a boy genius. You can't even get a job washing dishes. You're covered with blood and vomit. He said, your little mother up in Wisconsin is no longer allowed to accept phone calls from you because your stepfather is so tired watching you play on her emotions, so she'll go to her tiny little bank account and take a few more dollars and send it to her little boy to try to help him. He said he'd rather have her think you're dead than the way you are. He said, you've been going around AA now for almost 10 years, and you sit in these meetings whenever the heat is on, and you sneer to yourself and think about their little slogans and their little stupid steps and their little traditions, and they keep coming back. And now you're dying. He said, why don't you go back to AA one more, he might have said, why don't you go back to AA one more time and admit you're an alcoholic and see what happens? And if someone had said that to me, and if I were in a mood to be honest, I'd have to say, pal, you don't understand. I'm not an alcoholic. I wish I were, by this time I wish I were. I wish I were that simple. I wish I could be like these people and go and sit in those meetings and get sober and say, oh, I just feel good. But I've had the same problem again and again and again. Every time they say alcoholics can't stop drinking. I've stopped drinking a lot of times. The reasons were big enough, I stopped drinking. I've always been able to stop drinking. My problem has never been that. My problem is after I stop drinking, and I might feel good even for a day or two, but sooner or later, somebody seems to sneak into my bedroom in the middle of the night and put an invisible spring in my gut. And the next day, they start to tighten it. And it doesn't come out as, I need a drink. It just comes out as a little restlessness, a little irritability, a little impatience, a little tired of listening to the daily sermon of what I did the last time I drank. Why don't you shut up in there? And little by little, watch whatever technicolor there is in my life and all slowly go back to gray. So it's a gray life and a gray job and the gray house, and there's no pleasure for me and I can't drink anymore. And I've tried a lot of things for that. At one time, I went to a psychiatrist for a long time in an effort to break that pattern. And I did exactly what they said. I took their pills, I read their books, I did all these things, but it didn't help. So you know how you beat that feeling? You have a drink. And oh God. Oh. You just feel the tension drive out of your body. Then you have to say to yourself, now this time I'm going to watch it. And never once knowing that you can't watch it, but you'll try it again and again. But no one came up to me. I just stood on the sidewalk that morning, and I knew I had to get off the sidewalk. I was going to die. So I said to some guy, where's an AA club? He said, there's nothing downtown here. There's one way out on the west side on Wilshire and Fairfax. Go up this hill to Hill Street, cut over to Wilshire, and walk west and come to Fairfax. So I did that, and turned it to be 7.5 miles. God, in the rain. I was so sick. But I'll tell you something. When you really get desperate, you can do a lot of things that you really can't do. Because if you got to do it, no one's going to pick you up. I got to that club, and I almost didn't go in because there was some jerk in the doorway saying, welcome home, son. But I went in there and lurked around and hid out and had no idea that was my sobriety date. Had no idea. You know, the traditions we have in AA, the third tradition says the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. I have no desire to stop drinking. None. None whatsoever. To me, stopping drinking is lethal. I stopped drinking once in my life. In the mid-1950s, I was going through kind of a pattern where when I get to a certain stage of drinking, I'd start counseling police officers and pointing out what they were doing wrong. And so I got to go to jail overnight a few times. And this one time I came out of jail and in the morning I got so I could go home, take a shower, and go to work. And a neighbor was there. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, they wanted me to come down and get you." I said, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. I got that cop's badge number. I'm going to screw him around." He said, "I don't know about that, but while you were out drunk last night, your little son died and we couldn't find you." And that just about killed me. I had one little boy and a bunch of little girls. And God, it's just... And we took him up to Wisconsin and buried him in my wife's mother's grave, at the foot of her grave. And I took a little vow in his casket. I said, "John Imisland, this will never happen again. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." And we came back to Texas, and I stopped drinking. I didn't go to AA, because AA makes me want to drink. I stopped drinking, and I'd come home from work for the first time in a long time and sit down and have dinner with my kids and help them with their schoolwork and try to do things. Every meal we said a little prayer for baby John, that he'd be in heaven, and just we'd go for rides, take him to the movies sometimes on the weekend, and just things I'd never done before as a father. And it was probably among the nicer few weeks of my life. And then one night, wouldn't you know it, somebody snuck into my bedroom and put an invisible spring in my gut. And the next day, nothing much changed, just I was a little edgy, a little nervous. But as the days went by, it got kind of bad. Every day was a little bit worse. Pretty soon I hated my job. And I hated this town, bad luck town. And I suddenly realized what caused my son to die. This Norwegian Lutheran God had taken my little boy, who never committed a sin in his life, and killed him to punish me. Well, screw you, God. You'll get me in hell, but I will have nothing to do with you till then. That's the end of God in my life. Whenever any place where they talked about God, I just left. I don't want to hear that crap about that hateful old son of a bitch. And but the days kept getting worse, and it got so I needed to drink so bad. I needed some relaxation. I couldn't find it. And one day I just got crazy. My wife took the kids to mass and went to church, and I pulled the car in the garage, hooked up a hose to the exhaust pipe, and turned the motor and went to sleep and died. I just didn't know what to do. And the guy next door happened to be sitting in his breakfast nook having a cup of coffee, and he noticed me go in there, and he heard the motor running, and I didn't come out. So he ambled over there and found me dead in the car, and he pulled me out, and they beat on my chest and breathed my mouth and rushed me to the hospital and oxygenated me and got me functioning again. Then they decided to hold me for a mental examination. They held me for 3 or 4 days and determined I was seriously mentally ill and committed me to the state insane asylum with no due date to get out. Now that's how I get when I stop drinking. That's something I don't want to do. And I was in that nut house in Texas till the next year before I got out. I wouldn't have got out then if I hadn't remembered how to act like a recovered alcoholic, so I could fool them. But you know, when you have that long in the nut house, it's kind of hard to work it into your resume. A lot of us have resumes with big holes that say self-employed during this period. Working for a corporation that later vanished without a trace, you know. But why would I stay sober this time? I had no desire to stay sober. I knew all about AA, and AA doesn't work for people like me. My problem isn't really alcohol. My problem is to somehow get my emotions straightened out. Pardon me, my throat's getting a little dry. Happy days. And I knew that for me to stay sober is to either makes it so bad you can't stand it, because my problem is not really alcohol. And I fell into the hands of a guy, I don't know if because of my desperation or because he really had a power over me, but I had respect for him. And I listened to what he said. I don't listen to very many what AA say because they're nonsense. But I listened to him for some reason because I'd seen him in the movies. He was a movie actor, which is no qualification for anything, but I mean, I didn't know it then. And he was a good guy. I said to him, Bob, would you be my sponsor? Because I knew he must be rich, and I wanted him to share his wealth with me a little bit. Will you be my sponsor, Bob? He says, okay, but I want you to do what I tell you. Oh, sure, Bob. I found out shortly thereafter he wasn't a movie star at all. He'd been in 3 or 4 little movies. He had little cameos. I've been in more movies than he ever has been, but I didn't know it then. And they said he wasn't a good actor, but he was a good actor because he acted well at meetings, and that took a lot of acting for him. He was a right-wing fascist AA pig of the worst sort. Just, do this, do that, do that. I thought, why am I taking this crap from this idiot? Because he's my only meal ticket out of there that I could see. And I knew I was much smarter than he was. And I had to disguise that, because nobody wants to sponsor someone who's much smarter than you are. So I had to pretend to be dumb. That hurt me. I said, Jesus, Bob. He'd say some stupid thing that I knew was untrue. I said, Jesus, Bob, I never thought of that. That's wonderful. Just wanted to take a knife and cut my throat for being so. But he was a man, he was a good man. I look back and he was a man of strong opinions. What he would do, he'd come down once in a while and take me out from the club. And I was living in an abandoned car in the club parking lot, not very fancy, but it was dry. And he would take me out to dinner or something on the way to go hear him talk. Or he'd buy me some soft food somewhere, scrambled eggs so I could chew those. And one night he picked me up and took me out to the Brentwood meeting, which was a big meeting in town, the biggest meeting in town. And he was the speaker, but they had a 5-minute speaker, not like our 10-minute speakers, but a 5-minute speaker. This kid had asked to speak. He said, I came here because I was here about 11 months ago, and I was in deep trouble. And you people pointed out to me that my problem was alcohol. I never dreamed of that. And now I've stopped drinking for 11 months, and I have my family back, and my job is going well, my company's going well. And I apparently don't need the meetings you need because I don't go to any meetings. I just had to stop drinking. But my life is all better. I want to thank you very much. And they all clapped. And after the meeting, when Bob got done talking, the meeting ended. He went over and pounced on that kid. He said, what are you doing in AA? You shouldn't be here. You're wasting our time. Just raised hell to him. And on the way home, I said, Bob, why do you give this kid all that crap? He's sober. He said, well, because he's got an alcohol problem. I said, Bob, I hate to tell you this, but AA is designed for people with alcohol problems. He says, no, they aren't. No, it isn't at all. We don't need people with alcohol problems. I thought, well, must be hot on the set. There's hot lights on them tonight. Ooh. I said, what do they need, Bob? He said, they need to quit drinking, clean up their act, and when they're offered a drink, say no, thank you. That's what they need. I said, that doesn't work. I've been trying that for years. He said, well, guess you don't have an alcohol problem. I said, what do you think I have, Bob? He said, something that sounds like alcohol. And it's something that everyone in AA seems to have, but it's not an alcohol problem. It's something called alcoholism. I said, oh, Jesus, Bob, don't play word games with me. I look terrible, but I'm smarter than you'd believe. Shut up, he explained. And he gave me about a 3-hour harangue, most of which I was able to blot out before I went insane. But somewhere in that harangue, he changed my life, and I didn't even know it. Didn't know it till later, looking back. He pointed out, an alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking and cleaning up your act. However, in this strange thing called alcoholism, which unfortunately for you and me looks exactly the same, so most of us spend years thinking we have an alcohol problem and trying in vain to heal it. This strange thing called alcoholism, you'll discover sooner or later that stopping drinking and cleaning up your act has no significant long-term effect on your life other than to make it so uncomfortable you can't stand it. I said, Jesus, Bob, I never heard anybody say that before. They all said, nay, get sober. Just get sober, you'll be all right. He said, nah, for people like us, getting sober and then not doing anything about it, that's worse than drinking. That'll make you crazy. I said, Jesus, Bob, I never knew that. I said, why do these alcoholics all drink then? It's doing such terrible things to him. He says, you don't seem to know much for a guy that's been around AA for 10 years, you say? He says, they're not drinking because it's doing terrible things to them. He had a cup of coffee in his hand or a Coke or something. He said, if this were Johnny Walker whiskey, and I took a big drink, it would almost instantly alter my perception of reality. Make it just a little softer, a little more pleasant. And if I have a few more drinks, pretty soon I'm socially adaptable. I'm talking to nice ladies at the bar saying, you with anyone, Granny? I remember I heard a guy say something once that I think is the truest thing I ever heard. He said, I've never gone to bed with an ugly woman, but I've certainly woke up with a lot of them. He said, but the great thing about drinking is that you don't seem to know this kid. Nobody ever seems to know it. What makes an alcoholic is not what it does to you at all. That's secondary. To be an alcoholic, it has to do something special for you that it doesn't do for most people. It must alter your perception of reality. It must make you fit in. It must make you feel secure. Most people, it doesn't do that. This makes them dizzy. But 1 in 12 get this reaction out of it. And if you get that reaction, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Jesus, Bob, that's the story of my life we're talking about. I said, well, if these people, if drinking alcohol is so good for them, then they have to stop. But we had a girl in our group last week who said she'd been sober once, then drank again, and been sober again. Why would she drink? It was so wonderful to be sober. He said, that's the other half of the problem, kid. And he had a concept that I thought was stupid, but I heard a tape of it 25 years later, and I thought, by God, that's exactly right. He said, people like us, all human beings, we grow up in the world. It's not easy growing up. You have to take a lot of what appears to be crap from people. People aren't interested in you. People don't even know what you're doing. You don't really feel comfortable. You go through acne. You go through all sorts of problems. Every time you fall in love, you know somebody's going to break your heart. And the worst part is you don't even know what you're aiming for. What you're aiming for is a mature, emotional maturity. And some people get it when they're still young. Some people get it late. But if you can become emotionally mature, you can lead a good life, comfortable life. You seem to be able to hold a job instinctively without even thinking about it, as long as you want to. Get along with your co-employees, easy. Get along with the neighbors. If you're married, you know how to get along with your mate. You know when to give in and when to not give in. If you have a parent, you have some concept of how to be a parent and how to teach kids. He said, but this never happens to alcoholics. They never reach emotional maturity. I said, why not, Bob? He said, because along the way, when we get severe lessons that we're supposed to learn something from, we've discovered, I don't have to learn that. I can drink them away. Here's to you, household finance company. Here's to you, bitch, I never liked you anyway. Hey, Mr. Carlson, take your job and shove it up your nose. And they all work, because I've tried them all. But what he said was his concept. He said, you got to kind of imagine that every time it works, it leaves a little cold, invisible ball somewhere in your psyche. And you wind up with a whole bunch of them. Don't even know they're there. The only time you ever notice them is when you try to quit drinking. Then that activates them. And they're just waiting for something. It may happen at home, may happen at a job, may happen on the street. For example, somebody may hurt your feelings badly. Someone may treat you badly. Someone may not treat you with the respect you feel you deserve. Someone doesn't take care of you. Someone becomes an enemy to you. And you think about those things, and you think about these people. Sometimes you can lie awake at night thinking about, damn it, what's wrong with these damn fools? And it can get to a point, he said, where you can get to a point where people like us literally must drink to preserve our sanity. Isn't that ironic? We can't drink because it's going to make us insane, and yet there comes a time in our life where we must drink to keep from going insane. And we drink, and then all the little cold balls are glad. They start the pattern going again of go to drink till you can't stand it anymore. I said, Jesus, Bob, I understand that. All these things you've been describing, that's the story of my life for the last 10 years or more. And, I tried to explain to him once, I said, alcohol is the best friend I have in the world. Friends come and go, jobs come and go, lovers come and go, cities come and go. But when you really needed a few good drinks, oh God, what a friend that is. I said, and now you tell me that I can't drink, what can I do? He says, if that's what I just described to you as the story of your life, kid, there's a name for people like you. I thought, because he was a very profane man. I thought, that's something dirty to call me. What could that be, Bob? He said, you're an alcoholic. I said, alcoholic? But my problem really isn't alcohol. It is a lot of the time, but that's my number one problem. He said, alcoholics aren't people whose problem is alcohol. Alcoholics are people whose answer is alcohol. And if your answer is alcohol, you'll have a problem with alcohol as long as you live till you die from it. Jesus. That was in December of 1958, a long time ago. I was dry 6 weeks. And I thought, what if that's true? What if I am an alcoholic? What if I really am? Maybe I'm not crazy. My life didn't get any better, but if what it did, it took away much of the fear. Maybe I'm crazy. I always thought maybe I was crazy because I get these terrible periods of just running amok, and I shouldn't have done that. And I never had another drink or another pill. But I think it was the golden moment of my life in a sense, because in my opinion, the first 3 steps have kept more people out of AA than anything I've ever heard of. Who's going to admit they're an alcoholic? I mean, I'll do it in a meeting, but I know I'm not. Then you're going to return to God. I don't think so. And turn your life over to God. Try that some morning when you can't pay the rent. Here, God. Sleep on the street that night. But if I became an alcoholic, I thought I'd never become an alcoholic. But I experienced alcoholism is a disease of drinking combined with the worst disease of intolerable sobriety. When alcohol does these things for you, it's little by little strips you of your abilities to live at peace in the world, apparently. So I became an alcoholic in 1958. I'm not going to talk a long time later, but I want to mention a couple things to this new guy. And then my sponsor said to me, well, Clancy, you're coming along now. Let's start working on the steps. I said, Bob, I cannot take the steps. I mean, I know you mean well and you want me to do well, but I cannot return to God. He said, well, you're lucky. Nothing in AA ever asked you to return to God. Oh, to a power greater than myself, Bob? Is that supposed to fool me? He said, it doesn't say that either. He said, look on the wall over there. And I'd read those damn steps 100 times. He says, it never asks you to return to any old sickness. It asks you to come to believe in something. To start from where you are and certainly evaluate what your beliefs are. Maybe they're screwed up. Come to believe in something. Can't you come to believe in a loving God? I said, no. He said, can't you believe in AA? I said, I don't like it very much, no. He says, you think I'm doing better than you are? I said, yes. He said, congratulations, I'm your new higher power. And I could accept that because he's trying to help me. And if you're new, that's what you got to remember. They ask you to come to believe that a power exists here. You don't even have to know what it is. Maybe come later, but find out. But there's a power here, something that takes alcoholics and enables them not to have to drink. These people all didn't stay sober this year just to come and fool you tonight. They have found a power. And so you got to try to come to believe in power. That isn't hard to believe, there's some kind of power. But the big thing is, will restore you to sanity. What the hell is sanity? You can read 10 medical textbooks and get 10 different definitions of sanity. What is sanity? Oddly enough, insanity is easy to define. When the human brain gets under severe conflict, intense conflict, can find no way to break the system, to maintain its neural integrity, it will go to the last gasp defense. It will alter your perception of reality. And that is called psychosis. And when you become psychotic, if you become altogether psychotic, you're easy to spot and they put you away. But usually, you just get it in spots, and things happen in your life that shouldn't happen. Like you read the paper, God, I lived next door to this guy for 10 years. Nice man. Came home one night, took a rifle, killed his kids, killed his wife, killed himself. Why would he do that? Because something triggered his psychosis. Too bad. But that's kind of scary until you learn alcoholics almost never become psychotic. Isn't that unusual? You'd think we'd be the #1 candidates. They're mean to me, they all treat me bad. Why don't alcoholics become psychotic? And I couldn't figure that out. A guy in Washington, D.C. told me that shortly thereafter. He said, it's quite obvious, kid. When alcoholics feel bad enough, long enough, and refuse to do anything about it, they will always drink alcohol to survive. And alcohol has the power in alcoholics to alter their perception of reality. You and I have the power to induce temporary psychosis. Happy days. And then tomorrow you're back in reality, but you had a little vacation anyway. And so I guess with the second step, I had to come to understand these steps mean what they say. They don't mean something. You don't need to go to weekend retreats and discover what they really mean. They mean what they say. And the second step, you and I, you're going to do it, and I did it, have to come to believe there's some power here that will make it unnecessary for me to drink alcohol. That's all you got to believe. Don't even have to know how you're going to do it. You just have to believe it's possible. The worst thing, though, is that last one. Turn your life over to the will and your life over to the care of God. Who can do that? I told Bob, I can't do that. He said, well, you just try to do what I tell you. I said, all right. And he says, you know, you're kind of a screwed up guy. He said, I want you to write your inventory. I said, Bob, I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist. Why do I want to take it with an out-of-work actor? That made him upset. Everything made him upset. He said, just take the damn inventory. And about 2 weeks after that, I was fired off my job as a dishwasher. It wasn't my fault. I'll tell you why. I hate to admit it, but I was washing dishes at the Gaiety Delicatessen on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, and it seemed to me the busboys were bringing in more dishes than the waitresses were taking out. So I thought they're getting them from other restaurants to humiliate me. So I just left a pile of them. Take your own dishes, get them back where you got them. Well, it turned out I miscounted and I got fired. But I sat at the club, it was down near closing time, late at night, and God, it made me, I'd been sober several months. For a little while, I got out of that abandoned car, and then I lost every job I got to go back in there for a little while. And the people I got sober with were doing well, and they had cars. It seemed like they had girlfriends, and they were doing well, making money. And I couldn't hold a job as a dishwasher, for Christ's sake. And I was living in the backseat of an abandoned car, taking crap from people I wouldn't hire to mow my lawn last year. I just sat there and thought, I might as well get drunk. Why be like this? Why hurts all the time? The manager of the club was an old Irish guy named John Sullivan. I said, John, I don't know, you probably don't understand this at all, but I really feel like I want to drink. My life is just a shambles. He said, kid, let me tell you something. there's about 200 people belong to this club. As far as I know, there's 5 of them who like you. And 195 would just soon have you out of here. He said, now you can go get drunk if you want to. But remember this, you're making the only 5 friends you got in the world feel bad. And all those dirty bastards who hate you are going to be jolly. Is that what you want to happen? I said, no. I'll show them, those bastards. So I thought, but what could I do? I thought, well, Bob told me to write that inventory. If I'm going to have him be my higher power, I suppose I ought to do what he says. So I got some paper and I wrote my inventory. And I'd suggest to anyone here, whenever you write your inventory, do it on the day when you really feel bad. When you feel good, it's not, oh, I guess I made a few mistakes, but they weren't very serious. But when you feel bad, I'm a dirty son of a bitch, and here's why. Don't let the teardrops make the ink run. And I put down this, oh God, it's a terrible inventory. I said things I never would tell my psychiatrist. Guy asked me one time, why don't you tell your psychiatrist those things? Very simple. When you're paying that kind of money, you can't risk rejection. That's why. Some little snip to say to me, you did what? Get out of my office. But first, wash off that chair. And I slipped it underneath the back seat. And somebody told Bob that I'd written my inventory. And about 2 days later, he came by and said, I understand you wrote your inventory. Good for you. Get in the car. We're going to take your 5th step. I said, not today, Bob. Not tonight. I really haven't absolved it in my mind yet. I have to accept what I've written in it. He said, oh, shut up and get in the car. So I got in the car, and he gave me a flashlight, and we drove 40 miles to Oxnard. And I read this thing to him. As I read it, I thought, God, this is worse than I remember it. I mean, I'm not a big criminal or just a down-to-earth, everyday, lousy, cheating, sneak, thief, user, kind of person I really hate. And I got down there, and I thought to myself, he's going to make me walk 40 miles back from Oxnard. Well, that's all, Bob. So are you done now? Yes. He reached over and said, that's the best thing you've done since you got sober, kid. And I said, thought it was. And I did better after that. I held a job 7 months in my 2nd year before I got fired. And after my 2nd birthday, somebody put in some clout for me and said, maybe you can do this. They got me a job as the beginning writer in a big medical corporation. And I still had no front teeth, but I had to learn to carry my lip like this. And he took me down to the thrift shop, got me some clothes. They didn't quite fit, but they're close, And I went to work there. They said, Clancy, you're just beginning here. We don't expect you to do this, but we're having a terrible problem with this, trying to get this procedure down on paper. We can't seem to capture it. Would you want to give it a try? And I said, sure. I looked at something I'd written a whole treatise on 10 years before. And I wrote this thing. I just knocked him dead. I can't, Clancy, that's wonderful. Wonderful. And I was just on my way. And then one day, shortly thereafter, I heard a guy in the office who was supposed to be my friend say, he doesn't even have any front teeth. I thought, well, I'll be damned. I'm trying so hard. Now they're going to start this ridicule of me, and I'm going to get madder and madder. I might as well just pop in now and quit the job. But if I do that, I'll have to explain it to that damn Bob. So I called up Bob. I said, Bob, there's a guy here ridiculing me publicly. He said, what does he say? He said, I don't have any front teeth. He said, do you have any front teeth? I said, no, but that's not the point. He's ridiculing me and making fun of me. He said, well, ask him why he said it. I said, are you crazy? I know why he said it. He's putting me down. He said, ask him why he said it. So I got this guy aside. I said, I understand you think it's kind of funny that I don't have any front teeth. He said, oh, no. I said, oh, no. Where'd you get that idea? I was telling someone, that you don't have any front teeth and your clothes don't fit you very well, so apparently they're secondhand. and you write so well. So something bad must have happened to you back there somewhere, and you're making a comeback. I just want you to know my hat's off to you. And I said, oh. And I went through three or four things like that where Bob got me through emotional upsets. And when I was 5 years sober, I was director of advertising for that big corporation. Had front teeth, smiled a lot. If any of you new guys have lost teeth, let me give you hope. When you become spiritually perfect, they grow back. Ask your sponsor about it. When I was 7 years, I was 7 years sober. I was in Hollywood working on radio and television. I became quite successful. When I was 10 years sober, I was doing a public relations for a big oil company. 15 years sober, I was a marketing director for a publishing firm in Beverly Hills, and just shooting up. When I was 5 years sober, the same wife and all those children heard the crinkle of green in my wallet all the way to Dallas, jumped out of their post office box, rushed to my side, attached themselves to me like a group of starving chiggers. 9 months and 10 seconds later, another Catholic hit the street. Thank God it was a little boy. It made me cry. But then somebody gave me a book on the rhythm system, which apparently is a Catholic version of birth control. And I read that, so that was the end of all that. I got so I could say things like, not tonight, honey, I've got a headache. Now my kids are all grown up, and 3 of my daughters turned 22 this year in AA. They're good girls, and the other kids aren't alcoholic, apparently. Only one of my children have turned out bad. You hate to talk about things like that because, hate to take away the positive attitude, but my oldest daughter's become a judge. She was home a few years ago. She said, Daddy, at Christmas, she said, Daddy, when we were little girls, you used to get so mad at us and send us to our room when you were trying to stay sober. I said, sure, Dad. You don't remember. You know why. She said, of course I do, Daddy. But when you come to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I'm going to put you in a little room. I don't go there. But I'll tell you what I discovered. Here's what I discovered along the way. I'm almost done now. I discovered what the purpose of AA was. I always thought the purpose of AA is to stay dry and do the best you can. But that isn't a very rewarding thing, but it's all you got. You stay dry longer. I've been dry 53 years. I may burst into flame up here. The purpose of AA, I came to finally learn and understand as I went along and work the steps with my sponsor and others. The purpose of AA is to very slowly do what alcohol did fast. To change my perception of reality, to make it a friendlier world, to change my relationship to people, to have enough self-confidence so I'm not destroyed by a glance or a remark, to live in some degree of peacefulness in the world. I mean, you never do very well because the one thing people have to remember, no matter how hard you work the program, you never rise above human being. And human beings are imperfect, and they screw things up every so often just for a drill. I hear people say, all I ever want is lifetime of serenity. Try serenity for about 2 days. You'll find this hand dipping into the septic tank to stir it up a little bit, just get something going. But it's to enable you to live in the world with some degree of peace. And I was doing quite well. I lived in a big house out by the ocean. John's been out there, played ball in fact, today there's 125 AA members in my backyard as there are every Saturday, playing ball and having fun. And I can't be there. When I do go there, about 4 times a year, some newcomer will say, are you new? This is my yard, you dumb puke. But they're having fun. It's all very nice. And I live in a big house. And I had that house when I was 15 years sober. I always get along well. I'm making a lot of money. And I discovered that I was feeling good. It turns out that as you go along, this thing of making you feel good doesn't happen in one. It comes just Maybe when you write an inventory, it gets a little better. And when you make amends, it starts to get better and things like that. It doesn't come in a big, it can happen to you in your first 30 days for about a half a second, you know. What was that feeling? I felt good for a minute. But it makes you feel good. It made me feel good. It took me by surprise that I found myself feeling so good so long. And in a moment of strange judgment as a result of feeling good, one day I resigned my job in Beverly Hills, making a lot of money, and for the last 37 years, I've been the managing director of the Skid Row mission that threw me out in 1958. And people say, why did you give up your great career to run that mission? And there's no good answer to that. Well, it was such a significant decrease in salary, I couldn't pass it up. So every morning when I get up now, I'm still there. Every morning I get up, I jump in my car and drive through Beverly Hills, where I used to be a hip big shot, and wind up in this depressed, terrible area called Skid Row, and park my car under a building so no one will steal it, and make my morning walk around the building, and I'll do this Monday morning, the day after tomorrow, and see who survived over this weekend, who smashed their head to the sidewalk in convulsions, who overdosed on drugs, who just dreadful, dreadful. And then I'll keep going, and my staff and I will try to find ways to get these poor bastards to do something about their problem. And they don't want to. Skid Row is a very tough place to get people, because it isn't a financial need, it's a mindset. But we get a few. We got a few sober. Then I'll go home Monday night, and I'll have dinner with my wife and my troubled grandson who's living with our house, and then I'll go to a meeting and sleep well. It doesn't sound like a very exciting life for the life I've had, but it's been a good life. The one thing, if you're new tonight, I want to tell you. First of all, we can't guarantee you that someday you can have your own mission. There's only so many to go around, and that's for you. But I'll tell you that it's what you want to remember is this. You want to remember the nature of this illness is alcoholism, not alcohol problems. Getting sober will not make it better. Getting sober will make it worse if you don't do anything about it. That's why you want to find a sponsor and do the things. And take the daily dose of cowpox. Here, we can't get one vaccination that lasts us for a lifetime. We have to take little bits every day. And it comes in various forms, you know. Prayers are kind of cowpox, and going to meetings is kind of a cowpox, and certainly helping others is the major cowpox. But the reason to do all those things is to remember this. Now, we have a book, we have meetings, we have conventions, we have sponsors. All these things are very valuable, but they are not Alcoholics Anonymous. They are assistant to Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is the same thing tonight in Bristol as it was June 10th, 1935 in Akron, Ohio. It is one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him reduce his feelings of being different, at least enough, so that he will take an action he does not believe in. And that is the beginning of sobriety. That makes the first ember. Then you have to blow on it and surround yourself with people who are doing the same thing and show you how to do it. And little by little, sobriety becomes a way of life. And I've been sober a long time, and I really don't do an awful lot now that I didn't do when I was new. I do maybe more speaking, but I go to meetings, and I try to help people if I can, and sponsor people. And I'm not a good man, wonderful man. I'm just an alcoholic, and AA works for people like you and me. And so as you change, your perceptions of reality change. I remember when I was about 4 years sober, my sponsor died. And I got a new sponsor, a guy named Chuck Chamberlain. And he was kind of a spiritual guru, and I knew he's going to make me go some sort of religious fanaticism. I just told him, I said, Bob, Bill, Chuck, I mean, just don't give me a lecture on God. I don't go for God. God hates me and I hate God. He said, young man, I've got some bad news for you. You're not important enough for God to hate. Oh, yes, I am. Yes, I am. But that night I tried saying a prayer for the first time in years, just to thank God for my sobriety. And I started saying a prayer. Now it's been almost 50 years that I prayed earnestly, and I believe in a loving God, and I believe that when I don't believe in a loving God, that means there's something wrong with me, nothing wrong with that power's coming through. And the whole purpose of AA is to live in peace in the world as much as you can. You won't ever do it perfectly because you're a human being, but you can do it a lot. And tonight, I want to remind you of one thing. Yesterday morning, I got up in Belfast. Tomorrow night, I'll go to bed in Los Angeles, moving fast. I've given a great deal. I've gone without sleep, just so I can stand here tonight and tell you, take the goddamn cowpox.